So this is a quick exercise tutorial on moving from the water of the body. And so you're basically conceptualizing the fluidic mass of your body as a single muscle, and you're kind of moving from there. There's other isolation. So this is an isolation. You're not going to want to like try and move like this or be like this or consider this correct technique. This is focusing in on a single part of correct technique and attempting to strengthen it. And it's really no different than saying like, oh, I'm going to try and focus on my legs here. So why am I doing this movement? I'm going to try and get into a posture where I can feel my will like activating and shortening or lengthening, or just letting this area that I feel my muscles control the body. Right, so squats, and so you're doing a leg exercise. You could generalize this and be like, okay, I'm going to feel all my muscles as a single mass, as a single entity, and try and use them together as one coordinated suit, right? And that's still like an isolation here. It's kind of, people would think that muscular integration, you know, rather than, okay, I'm going to load my biceps. How do I I'm going to super focus on my triceps. What am I doing? I'm like, I don't know, I'm zeroing in on a specific aspect of being, I guess, to try and strain that part, because maybe you don't know how to do an activity that would strain all of those body parts evenly without killing you. Right? Imagine if you do any sort of movement and you're actually firing your muscles as hard as you would during a tricep extension, or focusing on your legs as much as you do during a squat. Like if you worked every muscle that hard at the same time, you're going to generate a ridiculous amount of force, and it's dangerous. Like it actually is force, so you'll fly up in the air, you'll move the object really quick, or your body will go really fast, right? Like if you fire all the muscles at the same time. And so you kind of isolate things just to make it less dangerous, but still get the same level of intensity, I guess. So what we're doing with this is to say, okay, so you can move from the muscles. Now can you move from the water? And so the water is just like a muscle. Anybody can feel it right away, but how much you can actually push with the water is dependent on your training. So if you train this all the time, then over time, this would get more and more effective, more and more powerful. So people will train this for like 10 years, and suddenly it becomes something that's strong enough that you could use in a sport, in a fight, moving around or whatever. But it is kind of the same thing. And so you're just feeling it's the cueing to this is it's right there, it's available for everyone. It's so simple that most people overlook it, even though if you dig into it, this is the substrate behind all of your movements and all your different types of isolations. Even if it's like mental, is that all of that metabolic activity in the muscles or all the metabolic activity in the nerves is inherently coming out of the water. So if you can use your will and your attention to isolate the water in your body, just the same way that you focus on a muscle, you just focus on the water, and then shove yourself from there. That's what's going all the time. And the only reason that you'll have to go slow at first is usually to get all of them, to get all the water actually like working together, because that's what you're doing. You kind of have to piggyback on top of what's already happening. So to move from the water, I have to just kind of like, first there's going to be a current, and then the main part of that is I'm going to be going with the current if I'm moving from the water. And so then after that, you can kind of swim, but if you're actually moving from the water and swimming, you're also simultaneously cognizant of the currents in the water. So that's going to be your circulatory system, your lymph system, all the interstitial, intercellular water. That's all going in different directions. That averages to just here. It's going to average to whatever you're doing, but it's multiple things going in circular directions. And so that averages to kind of stillness, but that stillness only comes about from all of that movement, which if you're going to move, that's what you have to jump into. And so this is an isolation, moving directly from the water. So it's not exactly like if you try and give it a martial art or a sport component, not really. You would never do anything like this. And so even though this is so simple and obvious, it's very, to people that are like super pragmatic and they only go, I'm only going to do what makes me better at this thing that I think, you overlook this however it's presented to you. People present this to you using all sorts of different things. There's so many different things going on in the water, and some of those things are happening systemically in the water. So if you talk about those things, you're simultaneously talking about the water or the consciousness that contains those things. And it works 99.9% as well, except those things are happening in water. So if you actually just talk about the water, you talk about the consciousness directly, it's a little bit more straightforward and easier to think about because you can see that what you're talking about contains all these different phenomena. Whereas if you're using a phenomenon that spreads systemically through consciousness to kind of like target and talk about, like let's say instead of talking about the water in my body, I just talked about red blood cells. Like it's only where red blood cells are and you just got rid of everything else besides that, I would look almost exactly the same. And functionally, when you're talking about what I'm doing, it would look exactly the same. So you could be like, red blood cells like have all the exact qualities of water. So that's what it is. And it that is where people's totalizing systems sometimes. So people either get a totalizing system where they look at a single unit or something dissolved systemically in the body, so that it gives them an accurate perception of the body, or they'll look at multiple systems of like, oh, here's 1, 2, 3, there's 4 limbs in a core, that's everything. If I track the 4 limbs in the core, oh, and the head, then I've tracked everywhere that the body is, so I know about reality, I know what reality is doing. So you get 5 element systems. I know about each chakra system in the body, and that describes also then you know about, but all of this stuff is primarily what is it dissolved in? Consciousness. So if you know consciousness, which is water. Water is the analog to how consciousness is holding everything. The water in your body is holding everything in exactly the same way. So pushing from there that's the super obvious thing that is people dancing. That's flow state. That's talent. Everyone's already doing it. What's the point of talking about it? I don't know. Right? It's been described brilliantly millions of times, but there's something about mainstream culture and normal people. So the people who make the schools, the people who make the government, the normal people that do that cannot integrate. Like you still have, high school PE, even though you've had people like Joseph Pilates and Alexander, what's his name? Like all these somatic movement giants. These people that are like universally recognized geniuses in their field. None of that, nobody cares. And that's true for so many disciplines. So many disciplines. There's been multiple geniuses over the past 100, 200 years, universally recognized, not integrated into how anything is done. So like I was saying, this is a muscle that you can develop. The only reason I know all this is because I grew up with this entirely atrophied, right? But ultimately, it is what would have been happening anyway, even if you knew the correct reason for everything. That's what was going on anyway, even though the descriptors were only fragments or things dissolved in something larger than itself, right? That's a higher dimensional space. Like if you're dissolved in something else, you dissolve into a higher dimensional space. Like where does sugar go if you put it in hot water? Sugar goes into a higher dimensional space. It goes from what it is and it becomes a field. So that's capable of any substance in any field anywhere. There's always the chance of, like, if the field changes enough or if you change enough, you can dissolve into that field. So that's happening in the body all the time with the air that we breathe in. The CO2 is constantly being materialized from this field and then being rematerialized into our body. Like things are constantly coming in and out of solution in the body, in and out of the higher dimensional space of consciousness of water in the body. When you eat something, it's like absorbed into higher dimensional space and then recoalesces somewhere else physically. It goes away, it goes into energetic form, which is what we would call dissolved. We become completely carried by water. And so to move from there, you just move from the water. Like you move from the water. This is you, and you have control over this exactly the same way as like just squeeze your hand. Squeeze your hand. Once you're able to squeeze your hand, you can hold things, right? So once you move from the water, oh my gosh, look at you, Qigong master. You've just learned all of Qigong. Just do whatever you want, but only move from the water. Limit yourself. If you master Qigong in terms of limit yourself to only doing what emerges from your consciousness. And then you've mastered the drill of Qigong. It's not how you're supposed to be. Like this is just a drill. It's an isolation, it's a fragmentation. I'm ignoring all of the muscles. I'm ignoring all of the thoughts. I'm ignoring all of that the same way that I isolate my legs and I ignore my upper body, or at least I don't send it very much energy. I have leg day, I have arm day. I ignore the rest of the bodies on that day energetically. So water movement is the exact same type of focusing or isolation or condensation, and people think it's like the ultimate dissolving and the expansion and the opening, but they've actually isolated into the expansion and the opening. So it's just remember that this is a drill. This is not how you're actually supposed to do things. Right? Because if moving from consciousness and mastering the field was how you were actually supposed to do things, it would have an impact or an influence on everything else. And it frankly, it kind of does, kind of doesn't. You can't really say that it does. It's everything else that determines if you do anything, right? So this is underneath and inside of the water movement, but in terms of practical application, like if I was gonna do some MMA or do a sport or even, I don't know, write or do anything, am I going to be thinking about this? Like, no, it's the biggest limitation possible. But people mistake it because it's the most supreme limitation. They mistake it for reality, which is just moving and doing it naturally using all of your faculties, all of your resources, which include the expansiveness of consciousness, but it also includes everything else just as much. The same way that if you had good body mechanics, you're going to use every muscle just as much. You're not going to leave anything out. Right? But yeah, you just do repetitive back and forth movements where you're pushing from your water, and so that's a, what is that? What is that? It's this electrical discharge from anywhere that you can feel in the water. Anywhere that you can feel in the water, you can push. And so if you don't push fast enough or whatever, you can get parts of the water will break, which is what you're trying to get it so you have unified water. And that's what lets you do really quick movements, is that you break the water. You break the unity, and that's where the explosiveness comes from of you. Your individuality, your explosiveness comes from a break in unity. Whereas if you keep it, you're just limited. And I'm not saying that like feeling this and like, okay, let's say I just stay with the unity of being and somebody's like gonna punch me, and like sure, lots of cool stuff is permitted. Potentially. Like if you're staying one with the field and you're not gonna break it. Enough stuff is possible for you to survive, totally. 100%. Is it the best thing? Maybe. But ultimately you're pressing, all the water can press everywhere. So you just go back and forth pressing as hard as you can with everything. And you'll find that when you're moving with the totality of consciousness, the only thing that's permissible is what most people would see as good technique. There's layers to it. There's like, where is the flute? Where is the heart? How do I push from the heart? Whoa. So anytime anybody's exercising, focusing, or going for it with their heart, you do it with this correct intensity, this incorrect focus. And then all that is kind of obvious. Like just, if you just kind of notice, you know, everyone's into noticing stuff. If you just notice that water is consciousness, and if you look at what's going on in water, like both in yourself and in the world, you start to figure out and see a lot of different things. Like a lot of things make sense. Because that's a big gap. People walk around their whole lives being like, I don't know what consciousness is. I guess I'm just conscious. I'm here. I see there's some awareness, okay? And that's like a deep person. That's a deep, deep, deep person. Most people don't want like, it just is, but you know, you're drinking this substance every day. It's the primary consideration for the start of any civilization is the water nearby good? Can we get water? Can we get water here? Can we get consciousness awareness? Everything else happens inside of water. We fill up these little bags of water with chemical reactions, and we're like, oh, there's our soul, there's our personality. And so just noticing what it is, why are you doing that with water? What's the big deal with water? Why are we using so much water? What does it do? Just kind of noticing that makes a lot of the world make a lot of sense, because there's so much of it in the world. There's so much inside you. There's so much inside of every animal. Everything with blood has these, you know, profound similarities and dependencies on water, the nature of water, the structure of water, how water behaves. And so I found that just that alone, I studied, you know, molecular biology and physiology and healing and all sorts of different sciences, esoteric sciences, hard sciences, psychology, and I just, it's all surpassed with like 3 or 4 years of water study. It's contained in the water. And anything that the water can do, it is definitely the queen of the sciences. It's just as interesting physically as it is intellectually, right? So you don't become a dumb jock or a skinny nerd. And yeah, it makes a lot of esoteric teachings. Like it makes the metaphysics of ancient Christianity extremely profound. Like ancient Christianity, like how they used to do it, like at the start, like for the first like 800 years or so. The way that they understood water and baptism and the person and the soul. And even what I'm saying doesn't necessarily change anything or vivify anything. I guess it's worthless, right? I mean, people are charging each other for water, but it's also one of the things that's just given out most freely and abundantly by other people and yourself, you know. There's kind of if you're selling water, it has to be either extremely special water or a very dumb person or desperate. There's a certain desperation in buying water. The vascular system I was noticing the other day is literally, it's like lightning bolts. Like you're discharging from the heart in electrical patterns. Imagine how the veins arc out like electricity. The energy from your heart pushes out into into the extremities that way. That's the pathway that it lays down. And you follow it. Anytime you try. And so the harder you try, the greater the blood pressure gets, the more the veins and everything start to fill out and pressurize. So these tension exercises, I'm staying in the water. So the energy's obviously in the blood. And to generate tension, I have to press all of the fluid on itself in different directions, but balanced. So everything has to be moving, but pressing into that center, and I can have tension, which is water pressure, but to stay still, there has to be like a rotation. Because you have two water. Yeah, you can run it into each other. So you can generate tension by running the force directly to center or try to pull center apart. Yeah, that works. And then if you start to miss, so I'm still here trying to project out into my vascular system and push the way I was talking about, but I'm trying to keep it even. And if it doesn't get to be even, I start to swirl. Since I'm in the mind, it'll start the center will start swirling. I'm not necessarily wanting to do that, but and so maintaining this like vascular pressure, this presence in the blood, this presence in consciousness, this presence in awareness. Oh my gosh, you just learned yoga. The postures are there when balance has failed, basically. When balance or presence have failed, you're in a posture. So relaxed compressive energy is stored in your cartilage. Compression. So if you relax and let the spine fall and like stack, that cartilage compression is the place where that weight is stored, so that you can add it to your muscular strength or add it to your whatever. It's the when you totally relax the gravity and let the whatever 100, 200 pounds of the body like fall onto the compression of the knees, onto the compression of the discs. That loading is why you can jump so high on a trampoline. It's easier to load that on a trampoline because it's not as scary. That's when people are doing stuff explosive, fast, powerful, they're compressing into and using this area, and if you don't use it correctly, you can blow a disc out. So strong guys, athletic guys, people who are physically powerful, people who are physically strong, are compressing and using their back, and so I because of that, people have taught there's a culture of spinal avoidance. And that's all for today, folks.